Episode 10. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. What is it about walking past a window at night when you've forgotten and left the drapes open? It's all in your imagination. There's not going to be anything out there in the darkness staring back at you. Or is there? Our guest tonight is Wade Parker. When Wade was 13, he had a terrifying encounter with a dogman. He's here tonight to share the details of that encounter with you. I guarantee it's an encounter you're not going to forget. And I also guarantee that you're not going to forget to shut those drapes after you hear this one. Wade, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Vic. It's good to be here.
Let's jump right into it. You've got a really good encounter to share tonight with the listeners. Before we get into that, could you give the listeners a brief bio on yourself?
My name is Wade. I'm 51 years old. I live here in Chandler, Texas. Originally, I'm from southern Illinois, the very extreme southern tip, right across the river from Paducah, Kentucky, which is about as south in Illinois as you can go. I guess I've been here in Texas about 25 years now. My encounter that I'm about to tell you about happened in southern Illinois in approximately 1976, I believe.
When this encounter happened, Wade, I realized you were only 13. But
correct.
Before that, did you believe in Bigfoot and things like that?
I was certainly open to the possibility of, say, Bigfoot. Back then, there was not the information available that there is now, obviously. I do distinctly remember reading a book. I want to say his name was Peter Byrne. And the book fascinated me. So I sought that out in the school library. But that was the extent of really my Bigfoot knowledge. But I never really believed in it technically. I was just hoping he did exist. Just open to the possibility.
Before we listen to the details of your encounter, your family, did they have any opinions on the whole Bigfoot thing? Did they shun the idea of it being a possibility? Because we're talking about a time that was not long after the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Well, you know, that's true, time-wise. To be honest with you, I really don't know that my parents ever thought about Bigfoot. It was not something we really talked about. I had great parents. They were open-minded on almost everything. Had I sat down at the kitchen table one night and said, "Dad, is there such a thing as Bigfoot?" I feel confident that he probably would have said, "Wait, I don't know, but we don't know everything that's out there. There's a chance." And as far as if I'd have said, "Dad, I believe in Bigfoot," he would not have shunned the idea in any way. He would have just said, "Well, you're welcome to that thought." But it's not something that really came up, so I'm having to speculate on what might have been said or thought.
Since that encounter happened to you so early in your life, let's go ahead and jump into the details of that encounter early in the show here. Please give us all the details that come to mind about your encounter. I'm really looking forward to this.
All right, Vic. I was 13 years old. We lived just outside the small town of Metropolis, Illinois. Metropolis had about 7,000 people in it. I lived approximately 4 miles from town. We were out in a rural area. Most everybody that lived out by us all had a little bit of acreage. I think we had close to 30 acres. Everybody had at least 5 acres, I think, something like that. We had some woods on our property. My best friend at the time his name was Brian. He lived down about a 3-minute bike ride down the road from me. So we hung out all the time, and one night he and I decided that I'd spend the night at his house. He lived in a split-level home, which was fairly popular back then, which means it was built semi into a hillside. It had a basement that you could drive into, raise the garage doors. the basement was partially furnished. He and I were playing in the basement. This is, and I'm guessing approximately 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Had a couple lights on, and on the basement wall was the window which went outside. The window was, looking back on it now, I'm guessing maybe 6 feet up high on the basement wall, which would have put it at ground level outside. The window was maybe 14, 16 inches tall and a couple feet wide. So anyways, he and I were just goofing around, and I remember at one point I just saw a movement of something in the window which really caught my eye. I turned and looked at it, and I said, "Hey, Brian, you see that?" And he saw where I was looking, and he goes, "Yes." What I saw seemed to basically fill up the window, and it was the outline of the head was canine to me. It definitely had a snout, relatively long. The head in general was bigger than the average dog. It had ears in an upright position. They were pointed. And as far as the eyes, I don't recall any glowing eyes or anything like that. Looking back on it now, I remember seeing the eyes. I saw teeth, but the mouth was not open. And it was just staring at us. And I knew that that was not supposed to be there. So I would say we stared at it for 8, 10 seconds, something like that. And it tilted its head maybe 30 degrees. And then a couple seconds after it tilted its head, it started beating the window. And when it was beating on the window, it wasn't like it was trying to punch through the glass. It was more of hitting it up high and bringing the hands down. It was definitely hands. It was not a paw or anything like that. It was something that could grasp an object. And I can distinctly remember the clicking of the claws as they hit the glass. And it did it very fast. It was almost a blur. And pretty much at that point, he and I both started hollering, and we turned to the stairs, which went up into the house, and we were probably up the stairs in about 4 or 5 seconds into the living room. And his mother and father were sitting on the couch watching TV, and his dad kind of started hollering at us because we were making too much noise. We finally got to listen and told him that there was some kind of monster outside. So he said, "Well, let's go take a look." So we all went out the back door, and by this time, probably a minute and a half at least had passed. And we went out into the backyard and around the side of the house, and of course there was nothing there. No, we didn't even have a flashlight to look for tracks or anything like that. Plus, whether he believed us or not, I'm not sure. The only other thing of pertinence is, near the house they had a large dog pen where 2 Irish setters were. What really struck me is these dogs barked nonstop at everything. The dogs were in the house, their house, and they were not barking, and they did not want to come out of their house. Even his dad realized that the dogs were scared of something. What did I see? Back then, I did not know. It didn't have a name. What I saw wasn't supposed to exist. Your mind works quick. When something happens to you, you can go through 1,000 thoughts in 5 seconds. And I just could not put an animal to what I saw. It looked like a big werewolf, for example. Whenever I've described the story to friends over all these years, back then the werewolves in movies and such really didn't look like what I saw. As I'm talking to you now, I remember I used to get some of the horror magazines and such, and some of the werewolves in those, drawn by artists, looked like that. But now, the Underworld movie series that's out, those werewolves look exactly like what I saw. Like I've said before, in today's times, you can tell somebody that you saw Bigfoot. They may laugh at you, but there's a possibility that they'll not laugh at you. Most people seem to be kind of accepting of the fact, well, maybe there's a chance. But how do you tell somebody that you saw a werewolf? And I'm pretty confident that's what I saw. I just had no name for it until recently, last few months, I started searching the internet and I ran across the term Dogman. Shortly after that, I discovered you and started really just poring over everything, trying to gain as much knowledge as I could. So I'm 100% sure what I saw back in 1976 that night was a Dogman. That's pretty much the story.
You know what, Wade? That is a source of such frustration for me, the fact that you've got so many people out there that have been through what you went through with Brian that night. And they just feel so lost because they just don't have anyone to go to.
Exactly right.
That's right. You made the point that a Bigfoot eyewitness, they might get laughed at, but they're much more likely to be taken seriously than someone that comes forward to try to tell someone about seeing what looked like a werewolf. So
right.
I'm so glad you did find me so that we could talk about this. To back up a little bit and talk about what you saw that night, if it was crouched down like that, looking in at you two, did you ever get an idea how it could support its torso and its head off the ground and scratch at the window with its hands like that?
Well, honestly, no. Over the years, when I think about the incident off and on, I've wondered that. How could I do it even? You know, looking down, you're going to be on all fours. At best, your elbows will be on the ground as well. But then you won't have the ability to just go after that window the way that creature did. I'm just not sure. Obviously, he's built a little bit different and has different strength than what I do because he got the job done. I couldn't imagine what kind of position he was in or how he could have done it. That's a very interesting point.
Well,
I don't have an answer for that.
As a human, we could kneel down on our knees and position ourselves like that to claw at a window, supporting our torso, our head, all of that. Depending on how it was built, I guess it could too. That had to be one heck of a sight. Wow. To talk about the after effects, did you spend the night there at Brian's house, or did you wind up just going home, having his dad take you home?
I sure wouldn't have hopped back on the bike I got there on. No, I did finish the night out there. I remember sitting up until the wee hours of the morning, Brian and I talking about it. We never had a good answer. You know, and honestly, at the time, we wondered, could it have been his dad pranking us? Some type of wild, for example, Halloween mask that was extremely good quality. The more we questioned that idea, the only answer that we ultimately kept coming back to was the fact that we were up those stairs in seconds when that thing was at the window. And when we opened that door, his mom and dad were right there on the couch in the living room looking at us. So it wasn't his folks out there. I never really came up with an answer. I can assure you, had it been a human being walking into the yard, the dogs in the dog pen would have set up such a noise. That's another clue that tells me that it was some type of creature, the Dogman, because the dogs in the dog pen, they were scared. They were not making a sound at all.
That's a really good point. Very good deductive reasoning right there. The dogs, like you said, they were shook up about something. They wouldn't act that way if it would have been Brian's dad that had crept around into the backyard. So it sure sounds to me like something was going on. I really think you did see a Dogman that night. An interesting tidbit I'm going to share with you, the cryptids that are running around out there that I refer to as being canine-type dogmen. For some reason, they seem to have a fascination with dogs. Before that Dogman clawed at your window there, I'd bet you really good money it paid a little visit back to those Irish setters in the pen. That's what shook them up, and when they went into their houses, that's when he came knocking at that window, unfortunately.
It sounds logical. That's probably exactly what happened. That's the first thing. He's obviously going to check out everything there, or he wouldn't have been at the house in the first place. So, yeah, he would go right up to the Irish setters.
Your encounter is the only encounter involving a dog that I have spoken to eyewitnesses about that I can openly share. But all I'm going to say is what I was telling you about dogs and what you were just describing about what happened. It comes together the way I would expect it to. Moving on, Wade, after you spent that sleepless night, you say you were awake until the wee hours of the morning. After you wound up getting home, were your parents there? And if they were, I'm sure that was instantly out. That was the first thing you did was tell them about what you had been through and what you had seen.
You're exactly right. I can remember trying to tell Mom and Dad about that, and they listened respectfully. Did they believe me? I don't know. I was not prone to telling stories. I was pretty much honest all my life. I didn't cry wolf, so I would like to think they believed me. But like I said, they respectfully listened. But I talked about it probably for up to a week until it finally tapered off. I can assure you, anytime I walked outside in the evenings, I was looking over my shoulder, and I didn't linger out there very long, even if my folks were with me.
I'm so glad to hear that you got such a positive response when you did make it home and share that story with them. It is so frustrating to hear about eyewitnesses going home to their loved ones, to their family, sharing the details of their encounter only to be laughed at.
They didn't poo-poo it at all. They were all about being respectful to me and listening.
That's really good to hear then. It's easy to assume that a Dogman encounter might last 15 seconds. An encounter might last a minute or two. The truth of the matter is, Dogman encounters tend to last a lifetime. It's not something that is like flipping a switch on and flipping it off. You carry that around with you for the rest of your days. How well or how poorly you deal with it, that's obviously got a lot to do with the character of the person. How well they can handle what they've been through, the type of people that they're exposed to after the encounter that either help them get over it, as much as possible that is, or unfortunately in some cases, how many people they're exposed to that laugh at them and do nothing but make things worse. Having said all that, could you share with us how that encounter has affected you moving forward in your life after the age of 13?
Well, that's interesting. I've always had these little issues going through the years. I did not necessarily attribute to that encounter directly until I started finding out more about what it was. And once I did that, I looked back and I'm going, oh my gosh, that's why I'm that way, or that's why I did this a certain way, or whatever. I can assure you, there's not much that I let bother me or scare me. I'm not scared of much of anything. But throughout the rest of my childhood, up to this day, the nighttime darkness does make me a little uneasy. Like I spoke before, I don't get any comfort taking the garbage to the end of the driveway at night, for example. That's probably a common example, but it's true. It's something that each one of us pretty much does. And the whole time I'm doing it, I'm listening for any sound or just looking all around while I'm walking. I've always been uneasy in the woods, daytime or night. But I was never really sure. I didn't really attribute that encounter necessarily to doing that to me. But once I started learning more about what I saw, that's when I realized that actually that's what it was, because I knew what was out there. It's very unsettling. And honestly, talking to you right now, even at this moment, I know that this creature, or creatures, I guess I should say, plural, exist. I saw it. I know it's out there. Still, logically, it's a little hard to accept. It's not supposed to be. That's not part of our realm, so to speak. With me, I was open to the idea of Bigfoot. I had my encounter back in the early 80s, which convinced me that they exist. But now, this Dogman creature, that's kind of taken, that's a big leap right there to accept that he exists. But I have to, I know he does. So, like I say, even today, it's something that's an issue. I recently started a new job in Houston, doing what I did years ago, which is basically running a drill rig. And normally, the drill rigs, it's horizontal boring. You're alongside the roadways, out in the open. The job I'm on now, it just happens to be backed up into the woods. The back half of the machine is in some pretty dense woods with a lot of brush in between the trees. Pretty much the whole time I'm sitting there drilling, I'm wondering what's looking at me. And every once in a while I have to get off the machine to go adjust some hoses, water hoses and such, which puts me right back there in the woods. And the whole time I'm back there, I'm really not watching what I'm doing. I'm watching what's in the tree line there. Why do I do that? Because I had that encounter, because I know what exists. I guess that's the best way to answer your question. That's how it's affected me.
All these responses that you've had to that encounter are perfectly normal. Almost any eyewitness that I speak to, that's going to be one of the questions I pretty much count on being asked is it normal for an eyewitness, for me, to be this shaken so long after that encounter happened? The answer is definitely yes. When you compare that to anything else that's going to happen to you in your life, what's going to compare to that? There's no way to ever prepare yourself for something like that. A Bigfoot encounter is very unnerving, obviously, but even that, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions, still doesn't compare to how creepy, how terrifying it is to encounter something like that Dogman that you encountered when you were 13. The fact that you were only 13 when you had that encounter, that just makes it even more traumatic for you, obviously. Before we move on with that angle, you mentioned something I want to touch on. You said that you did have a Bigfoot encounter. Could you tell us the details of that?
Sure. This was approximately in 82, 83. I had just recently gotten married, and due to our work schedules, we hadn't had a chance to have a little honeymoon or whatever. Like I say, I lived in Metropolis, Illinois, which is right across the river from Paducah, Kentucky. Well, in western Kentucky is a lake that it's just huge. It's called Kentucky Lake, and it's got hundreds of miles of shoreline. Most people have heard of LBL, Land Between the Lakes, TVA, stuff like that. It's all kind of intertwined right there. My wife and I had just bought a boat, so we decided to spend the weekend on Kentucky Lake. So we went out that Saturday morning and did a little fishing, went skiing, and just basically had a lazy day on the water. Probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock, it was starting to get dark. It was going to be dark within the next hour or so. We decided we would put in the shore somewhere, set up for tent, spend the night. So we found a quiet, secluded bay and pulled right up there on the little sandy beach, and I tied the boat off to a stump that was there. And to describe the beach, it was from the water, the beach was probably, say, 15 or 20 feet, maybe of pure sand from the water's edge up to where some bushes started. And the bushes ran as far as the shoreline did. There was an incline, relatively fairly steep, of the bushes up into the tree line. And that was probably another 20 feet. So you had a relatively flat beach that was 20 feet, and you had your steep incline up into the trees, which was another 20 feet. we set up it was just a little 2-man tent. And I'm a big guy, so I pretty much filled it up on my own. We built us a little fire and just kind of wound down. And by the time we were ready to crawl into the tent, it was well after dark. We crawled inside and zipped up the flaps. And by the way, the flaps and the zippers were facing the water away from the trees. Just seemed like the thing to do. We laid there. We were just exhausted from the day. So, I'm assuming that probably laid there 5 or 6 minutes, something like that, and, started to drift off. And I can remember hearing a sound that was similar to shuffling, but it didn't last very long. Maybe 4 or 5 seconds. It didn't seem like it was far from the tent. So, my mind became aware of that, and you're running through, okay, what could it be out there, a raccoon, something, I don't know. I wasn't really concerned. And then, I kind of heard the proverbial twig snap. Just about the only way to describe it. So I didn't get really in a hurry, but, I leaned up and I unzipped. I think the zipper went down first, then across on the other zippers. I unzipped it, kind of crawled half my body out the tent and looked. And when I did, I didn't see a darn thing. Didn't hear a movement. I stood up outside the tent, and it was just me, and my wife was inside the tent. So I probably stood there 30 seconds. I was not really concerned. And I crawled back in the tent, zipped it up again. So this time we laid there talking about it. We just kind of slowly drifted off again. And probably another 10 minutes passed, and I heard a sound that I could distinctly tell was in the brush towards the head of the tent. And it was coming closer. Then the sound stopped. I said, all right, something's messing with us. So, I unzipped the tent again, got out, and this time, up in the tree line, I heard movement. But it's so dark I couldn't see anything. So, I told my wife, I said, something is messing with us. It keeps coming back. I'm not sure what's going on. So at this point, I'd say I'm a little concerned. I've got her to protect, me to protect, what's going on. So the only weapon I had was my hatchet that I used to chop up a little bit of firewood. So what I decided to do was take the hatchet in the tent with me, and I was going to leave the flap unzipped this time, so I didn't waste time in case whatever it was came back. So crawled up in the tent with my hatchet, and I'm laying on my back, and then in typical newlywed fashion, she's laying on her side and with her head in the crook of my arm, which put my left arm running down the edge of the tent, right up against the side wall of it. We were there a very short period of time, this time less than 5 minutes, and I heard the sound in the brush again, and it was steps. It wasn't fast, it wasn't quick, but it was slow and steady. Then the sound quit, and in about 5-10 seconds, I heard something just right outside the tent. At that point, like I said, my arm was up against the sidewall. At that point, something stepped on my arm, and it covered from the back of my hand to my elbow was pressed down into the floor of the tent, into the sand of the beach, and it was heavy. And I think, as I recall, I let out a whoop and a holler and jerked my arm out from underneath whatever it was. And, you could just hear it going quickly away through the brush. And I think I jerked up a couple of the, tent stakes as I was trying to get out of the dang thing. But basically I was in a panic. Like I said earlier, when you're in an incident, your mind goes 1,000 miles an hour. My mind was working. I knew there was nothing that should have been that big to cover up my arm. So I'm outside the tent with a hatchet in my hand. She's trying to untangle herself from the mess of the tent. And at that point, I decided that we were going to leave the beach. So my boat was tied into the tree line. I basically chopped the rope down on the beach. I did not go untie it. We left everything on the beach, hopped in the boat, and took out to get as far away from shore as we could. There was a marina a couple miles away. I just motored right up into that marina, found an empty boat slip. I didn't care if somebody was renting it or not, but it was empty, so I put my boat into it, and we got out of there, went and got in the car, and went to a motel. And at the motel, we called my family and her family, told them what had happened, and asked them to meet us there the next morning, which they did. And then we all piled back in the boat. We went back to that same beach. And as we were pulling up to the beach, everything looked like we left it. The tent was in a complete disarray, did not appear to be tampered with in any way. Our miscellaneous things were there, my cooler and such. And of course, on the way over there, you're wondering just what was it? What could it have been? And I had my suspicions. I believed at that time I had just had a Bigfoot encounter. Everybody said, well, let's look for tracks. Didn't really find anything definitive track-wise. You could see where something had been coming through the brush towards the tent. It was broken over, mashed and such, down into the sand. You could see as it came down the incline where it had scooted the feet or whatever. Was there a definitive track? Not really. We found what one could say might have been a fairly clear half track of the front of the foot, and it was very deep into the hard sand. And like I say, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4", 275 pounds, and I could not make a track as deep as this was. Had I had that encounter in today's time, I would have had a lot more knowledge of things to look for, how to interpret the signs that were there, simply because of what's available to us now, that we can learn from now. Back then, like I said before, the Bigfoot phenomenon was not widespread. Nobody really talked a lot about it, at least in the circles I was in. So didn't really know what to look for and didn't know what we were actually looking at. But I can assure you from that point on, I knew what had stepped on my arm. That's my Bigfoot encounter.
That's pretty bad luck to have two encounters like that with two different types of cryptids. When you felt that foot on your arm, Wade, for a brief second at least, or even before that when you heard that twig snap out there in the darkness, for at least a brief second, did something in the back of your mind instantly switch on and say, Dogman?
No. That's my first honest answer to your question. I don't know why. Looking back on it logically, perhaps that's what one would have thought would have popped into my mind. And quite frankly, Vic, I'm glad it didn't, because the Dogman thing just scared the heck out of me. And this was maybe 10 years after the Dogman encounter that I had in that basement. The Dogman just didn't come to my mind. The Bigfoot thing came to my mind afterwards. I just wasn't sure what was going on during all the action. And yes, it was scary. Yes, when it stepped on my arm, it was scary. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken out like I did. I had her to protect it, got her out of there. But, looking back on it now, and even shortly thereafter, I didn't have there was really no fear there afterwards. I guess after I was safe, now that I think about it. The thought of Bigfoot then, no fear. It's not scary to me. The thought of going on a Bigfoot expedition now, if and when I could, there's no fear. It's not scary to me. It's enjoyable. It's something I would look forward to. But the Dogman, I want nothing to do with. that's scary. You know, there's no fun in that. There's no eager anticipation to go on a Dogman expedition. You know, in fact, after learning what I have and knowing what I saw back then, I really have no desire to go out in the woods looking for Bigfoot now like I always used to. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question that you asked. Did I think of Dogman? No, I did not.
Well, it's a good answer. What does that say, Wade, about how the two compare? When you had a Dogman outside of the house you were in, and that encounter scared you so much more than being out in an exposed situation in a flimsy tent with a Bigfoot right outside on the other side of that tent wall from you.
Yeah, you're right. That's correct.
That says it all right there.
I know that there are reports of violent Bigfoot encounters, whether it's in books or here, there, wherever on the internet. But honestly, back then and even in today's times, to me, what I see, most of the encounters appear to be curiosity or no violence or whatever. There's nothing to really create a lot of terror. And I can remember telling my wife at the time, I said, we just got attacked by a Bigfoot. But, you know, once I calmed down and the situation was over, I remember telling her that it's not that big of a deal. Everything I've read about, they're curious. They just want to check us out. The Dogman at 13, had I been in that tent out there then, would he have been curious, wanting to check us out, you know, and just kind of walked around the tent and gone off? And I don't know. I don't think so. He was overt. He beat on the window to make a point. What his point was is, hey, I'm here to scare you or whatever, but he made his presence known. And you're right. He's far more terrifying than the Bigfoot is to me.
I guess it's because of them looking so much. They look similar to us in the fact that they walk around on two legs most of the time. Sure, yeah, they do go down on all fours if the need suits them, but in a way they do look like us, walking around bipedally, having arms and all that, but that animalistic nature, when you look at that wolf or doggish type head, I think it's just something about that animalish appearance that just shakes us up so much when you see them compared to
Sure,
Bigfoot. From what you've said tonight, Wade, it sounds to me like after your Dogman encounter, you coped with it and handled it better than you have been dealing with that encounter recently. Is that an accurate assumption?
I would say so. That's correct.
Now, what is it about what has happened recently? Did this angst come to the forefront after you had contacted me? Is that why you're a little more uptight about being out in the woods than you were, say, 10 years ago?
I would say that's probably true. You know, honestly, I never doubted what I saw when I was 13. I knew what I saw. You know, looking back on it now, perhaps I didn't. I'm not saying that I thought I was crazy, but maybe I left open a possibility that I might have imagined it, because what I saw is not supposed to exist. What I saw was a monster. And I never really accepted it, perhaps, until I was lucky enough to run across on the net you and other people like me who had seen these things. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not the only one. In fact, I'm one of hundreds, I guess, if not more, that have encountered this creature, and it does exist. So once I started realizing that I wasn't the only one, that I'm one of hundreds or thousands that have seen these things, then it really, I guess it hit home. This thing does exist. It's out there. It was kind of like the final nail in the coffin, I guess. I wasn't crazy. I didn't imagine it. That may be hard to put into words or for some people to understand. But at 13, okay, you're a kid. I know I saw it. I know it was there. But there is always that tiny little window going, or did I? Did I imagine this? Did Brian have the same hallucination I did? When you're at that age, you don't deal with things the way you do when you're mature, when you're older. The thought process is a lot different. I guess that's kind of, I'm dancing around the fire here, what I'm trying to say. As I matured and got older, the thought process matured as well, and it's like, okay, this really happened. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people like me. There's people like you who are out there for us to tell our stories, to listen to us. So it made it more, that's it. It's made it more real now. So the fact that it's more real now just gives you more reason to use your word angst or wonder what's looking at you from behind. It's more real.
I think also, Wade, I could be wrong, but I think something else that might play into why you are a little more anxious about the whole Dogman thing now than you were before you found out about me is you listening to the shows that I've done and listening to other eyewitnesses share their encounters. That, I think, might be reinforcing the point for you that, hey, there just might be more of these things out there in the woods than I ever imagined that there were. I hope that isn't why you're having more trouble coping with your encounter than you used to have before you knew about me being out there and what I do. But I would bet pretty good money that that is playing a fairly strong part and why you are a little more nervous about this than what you used to be.
You're correct. It's that is another aspect of it. There's a bunch of aspects to consider about all of this, but that is a pretty big one. Back then, and growing older, into my 20s and 30s and such, I look back on that incident, and I didn't really consider that there were a bunch of them, or they were widespread. I considered if I had that encounter, it was one. He's in Southern Illinois. Well, gosh darn it, now I find out that they're everywhere. They're all over the country. So, you're just not safe anywhere. There's tribes of these things running around. And, and if they're out there, they're smart. So now I've got to wonder if I see 20 years at me looking through the bushes, is there two more of them behind me? The mind never shuts off. And the fact that now I know that there's untold numbers of them all over the country, if not more widespread than that, sure, that's a concern. We haven't heard on the news that a dogman walked into a restaurant and killed somebody or kidnapped anybody, but maybe we will someday. But, there's a lot of unexplained things that have happened that perhaps they could be responsible for. I can assure you, I believe in them. I know they exist.
Yeah, you definitely were not crazy. I know you mentioned the crazy word. You considered that for a moment, but you and Brian did not simultaneously hallucinate and imagine that you saw a dogman at the window. Yeah, you definitely saw what you think you saw. Yeah, when I mention the fact that there are more of these things than most people will ever know, I don't mean to cause any type of a panic in anyone, but I do think it's important that people know that that's reality. That's how it is. You're not going to walk into a dogman in the produce aisle at your local grocery store, but don't think for a second that they're so rare that if I go into my nearby large woods, there's no chance of bumping into one either. So why should I take the time to protect myself? Why should I worry about going out there alone or practicing good judgment? That just wouldn't be a good idea, in my opinion. One more thing on that topic I want to share. Like I've said before in other shows, for every one eyewitness that is willing to come forward and come on the show and share the details of their encounter with the public, there's a good solid 10, 12, or maybe even more people, more eyewitnesses that won't. So you can't judge how common of a phenomenon this is by how many people you hear on a radio show like mine that are coming forward and reporting what happened to them. You just can't do that. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. Now, you've had some questions, Wade, about these things, about dogmen for me. There was one question in particular that you said you wanted to ask regarding doorknobs. What was that
Correct.
question?
Well, I can't really tell you why this popped into my mind, but, and again, when that creature was beating on that glass, he had human-like hands. I can't say if it was an opposable thumb or whatever like that, but I just don't know. But I saw distinct long finger-style things with claws on them. It was not, for example, the paw of a dog. So, and again, I can't tell you why I had this question, but I did. It just popped in my mind one day. I wonder if they can manipulate doorknobs or handles, be it on a car or a home. So that was my question to you. Again, I have 1,001 questions if I can ever think of them, because I just can't get enough of trying to learn about these things. That's probably just one of the questions that's a drop in the bucket of all of them. But I find that interesting. Can they manipulate doorknobs, handles, and things like that? And I think I asked you in your reports that you've received or people you've spoken with, have you heard of that happening?
Unfortunately, the answer to your question is yes and yes. I have been told about situations where they have manipulated doorknobs on a house. I have also been told about situations where they have manipulated handles and levers to get into chicken coops and into barns, going in and slaughtering livestock. I've also been told about them manipulating door handles, levers on car doors to open them up as well. I don't know if that situation or those situations were dumb luck. Fiddle with that strange silver thing long enough, like I saw the human do, and that door opens up, or if it was a matter of them having more intelligence and figuring out without trouble. But yes, to answer your question, unfortunately, yes, they apparently can manipulate doorknobs and door handles on car doors under certain circumstances.
Right. Well, that certainly adds a whole new element to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I probably shouldn't share this. I don't want to shake anyone up, but there was a gentleman, I believe in 2009, that shared an encounter with me that is almost as creepy as your encounter, Wade. He lives right there on the edge of the LBL and has a large doggy door in his back door. And one night, he heard a commotion downstairs. Nothing too loud, but enough to get his attention. If I remember correctly, I think he went to the top of the steps, looked down the steps, and he had a clear view of his back door. He told me that he could see a dogman that was trying to gain entry into his house through that large doggy door. It was too big to get through. It was only partly through. One arm, I think, and its head was all that could get into the house. But
Right.
the image of that, the idea that it was trying to get into his home, I really wonder. I wonder what its motivation was. What would have happened? That's some really creepy stuff right there.
To me, it would be fairly obvious that if he's smart enough to know that that's a possible entry into the home where the human is, he knows the human's in there. He can smell him and see him or whatever. And if he's bold enough to try to get in, then he's bold enough to take control of the situation, whatever he wants to do. He had no good on his mind, I'm sure.
I'd say.
But he's putting himself into a position that just mere curiosity would, I don't think that was it. That's quite a story.
Yet the idea of something like that doesn't know what it is like to be inside of a home, for it to be bold enough to try and get into that home when I'm sure it knew people were in that home, that is just such a creepy idea. There are a lot of things like that I can't share with the general public because the eyewitness that shared these details, whatever they were, with me, they don't want them put out there.
Sure.
If you don't know about something like that, then how can you protect yourself from it?
Exactly right.
In closing, Wade, do you have any closing questions or any closing points you'd like to make?
Wow. I don't guess at the moment I have any questions. After we finish this interview, and I'll put my mind to it, and the thoughts will start rolling. That's when the questions will come. But the only thing I want to say is I can't tell you, and I know you probably heard this 100 times, I can't tell you the relief I had when I found you and you were able to answer my questions. And basically, I found out that, no, I wasn't crazy. I did see that. It's out there. And I can assure you it does exist. My eyes did not lie to me that night, nor did they lie to Brian. And let me add that over all the years, Brian and I stayed in contact. We spoke to each other once or twice a year, generally. And almost every time that subject came up, and we'd compare notes, and we both saw the same thing. That's my closing thought is they do exist. And everybody needs to educate themselves on it, just like I'm trying to do. So thank you for being there, Vic. You've helped out a lot.
You're more than welcome. I'm just so glad you found me. I'm so glad I was able to help. When we first started talking and you shared your encounter with me, the two things I wanted to accomplish, making sure I got the point across to you that you're not crazy, and also getting the point across to you that you're not alone. It's so easy when you don't know any more about these things than most people do. It's so easy to think that it's just you that this happened to. Thanks again so much for coming on the show, Wade. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic. Appreciate it, too.
Thanks again so much. Don't be a stranger. If any more questions pop up, please do let me know.
Yes, sir. I'll holler at you.
That sounds really good. Well, have yourself a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Bye.